Winchester, an historic city that was once the capital of England, now a vibrant modern cultural city where its original and ancient architecture mixes with 21st century Britain. Visitors usually approach the cathedral down the tree-lined paths that lead up to the famous west front window, but its true treasures lie on the inside.
We're in the nave of the longest medieval cathedral in Northern Europe, built on the orders of William the Conqueror himself. Our work started here in 1079 and the building was finally completed in about 1120. Now, the nave is one of the most spectacular features of the whole cathedral, and if you look up in the air you'll see that it's 26 metres up to the stone ceiling vault above our head. And then you have about another 6 metres above that ceiling vault, actually to the apex of the roof. Now that's a monumental construction. And when you think that the stone for the original cathedral was brought from the Isle of Wight, it was brought across the Solent by barge and then up the River Itchen and unloaded on site in Winchester. And the whole of the nave is dominated by the great west window, which you see behind me. And I always find it quite ironic that when we look at the Great West Window, what we're seeing is the result of an act of gross vandalism, which during the Civil War, Winchester was a royalist town. And in 1642, parliamentary troops under General Waller attacked the city. In December 1642, they actually attacked the cathedral. They burst in through the west doors and marched in with colours flying, drums beating and matches fired, as a contemporary account would put it. Having got in here, they ransacked the place. One of the things that they destroyed was all the medieval glass. They fired their muskets through the windows, and there was a story that they even tipped the skeletons out of the mortuary chests which contain the remains of the old Saxon kings, and used the leg bones as convenient hammers to help them break the glass. And what you see in the Great West Window are the remains of the original medieval windows. Because if you look carefully, you'll see that the window has no form. It's merely a random mosaic of thousands of pieces of little glass from all around the cathedral, which were salvaged and then put back in place in the 1660s at the time of the restoration of the monastery. We've now moved to the choir, and this is the largest surviving medieval choir in the country. The choir stalls were carved between 1308 and 1310 by a carpenter called William Lingwood, who came from near Norwich in Norfolk. Now, it's very unusual to be able to pin down a medieval craftsman to a period of 2 years during which he was working, and it's even more unusual to be able to actually know him by name. Look at the various carvings of foliage, and look at the various animals which are shown in the carving, including, and look specifically for a green man, which is an old pagan symbol, but for some reason Mr. Lingwood included the old pagan symbol actually within the choir stalls. Well, we're in the presbytery, which is the holiest part of the whole cathedral, and it's been described as a church within a church. Now, in monastic times, only the monks would have been allowed in here. Now, the holiest part of the presbytery is the area known as the sanctuary, which is the area beyond me, beyond the altar rails. The holiest part of the sanctuary is the high altar, and behind the high altar is the great screen. Now, the great screen is quite unusual in this country. There are only 3 of this magnitude. One is in St Albans Abbey, one is in Southwark Cathedral, and the other one is in Winchester. Now, the Great Screen was originally constructed in about 1480, but I sadly have to tell you that all the statues are in fact Victorian replacements. The original ones were all smashed during the Reformation.
Original carvings have been in place around the building for centuries, but all of this may not have survived the turn of the 20th without the diver William Walker, who saved the cathedral from possible collapse. The cathedral's archives house many original photographs and artefacts which offer an insight into how and why the work was done.
There's a good one there. This gives people remember the diver. Well, they would. And there is the diver, a tiny figure in the middle of about 150 other people. So it was a big operation, and it wasn't just the diver, of course, because there were carpenters to put up the scaffolding, and there were masons to cut the stones, and there were building labourers to dig holes, and all manner of people involved. It's an amazing snapshot of the cathedral at a particular point in time. And apart from, well, scaffolding, lots of pictures of scaffolding, there are pictures of the defects which they were dealing with, the alarming cracks in the walls, and these cracks here, not in the 13th century part, in fact here in the Norman parts of the building as well. Now, everyone knows the story of the Winchester diver, William Walker, but people sometimes forget that at the beginning of the operation, nobody had thought about using a diver, and the idea was to simply dig trenches in order to achieve the underpinning, which is how most underpinning is done these days. They go down, and they go down through the topsoil, they go down through the subsoil, and at the same time, they eventually reach the bottom of the old cathedral foundations, the 13th century footings, and then they can start tunnelling underneath the walls themselves. And with luck, the walls don't collapse because it's not a very wide gap and the masonry will hold itself up. They carry on going down and they get to the peat. And we're now talking about probably about 4 or 5 metres below the surface on which we're standing here. Then they break through the peat layer. Initially, this is what happened anyway. And lo and behold, the water underneath within the gravel comes surging up under artesian pressure and fills up the trench very rapidly above their heads. Then in April 1905, Francis Fox, the engineer, came down on one of his periodic visits, and having inspected one of the drifts or trenches and realising that there was a real problem with the water coming in, he went back to his hotel room and must have had a sort of moment of inspiration and thought, diver! Ordinary workmen could dig the trenches, they could tunnel under the cathedral walls, they could start nibbling away at the layer of peat, but then at that moment, while the trench was still dry, the diver would go down, the diver would dig away the rest of the peat, up would come the water, but the diver would be in his diving suit and he could carry on working. And that really is basically the way that the work went on from 1906 right through until 1911.
Walker worked tirelessly under the water for the duration of the work to ensure that the leaning walls, which are still visible today, stayed standing for future generations to visit and enjoy. Thanks to him and the men that helped him, the marvellous structure is still here to dominate the Winchester skyline today.